Hey there YouTube, I'm Ikitsu, this is the Ikitsu Times, welcome to my channel, welcome to a little bit of Sins of a Solar Empire 2. So I was considering just sticking with the Advent videos because that's the faction I care about and that's really all I wanted to talk about. But then a patch came along and this was quite a while ago, but it completely annihilated like half the guide basically. They changed the statistics and they even changed the roles of a lot of the ships to the point where they're no longer following the same sort of rules as what I laid out in that one. So the changes are radical enough that I did feel like I probably want to change all of my Advent videos at some point in time. But I decided in the end that if I'm going to change them, I might as well do all the factions. So here we are talking about the tech. This is the Cobalt Light Frigate. This is probably the closest thing that the game has to a basic faction and a basic ship. But just because of that, like the way this game works, none of the factions really feel that generic. This is just probably the closest to that. So there's a few things that changed across the board for light frigates, and those apply to this as well. If we take a look, this has 100 durability, which if we remember our Disciple video, that had 50. All of the light frigates had their durability increased. And we'll get into the Pierce as well. That is the other major change. 200 Pierce, they all used to have around 150. Which means that they're capable of dealing with a much wider band of targets than they were capable of dealing with when compared to before. So let's take a look at the statistics for the Cobalt Light Frigate overall there. It's, like I said, 100 durability. It's got 635 armor points, which is very, very good, and it's got 610 hull points, which is okay. Armor heavy means that's kind of the theme for this faction. They've got a lot of armor points, and that's going to be something that we see across the board for these guys, and it's going to be something that sort of makes them stand out a little bit compared to the others. Armor as a defensive strategy means that you're not relying on something that you can recover throughout the battle, which means that over a really long extended fight where stuff is taking lots of chip damage and stuff like that, where it would otherwise be able to recover some of that health, the way that the tech faction works is they just don't take as much damage in the first place, but they can't recover once they've taken that damage as easily as the other factions. The reason is that your armor does reduce the damage that you take when you get hit by a certain amount. It's the same mathematics as durability, stacked on top of durability as well, except Pierce doesn't affect it. So the armor points are way more valuable than hull points. For the damage here, we're looking at 9.5 DPS at 200 Pierce. As I sort of mentioned before, we'll ignore home guard determination. So for hidden statistics, we can go here. We can find that our armor strength is 40. This is kind of like having 40 durability that doesn't go away when you're pierced. So the math for this, I can't remember exactly how it works out, but I believe this is approximately you reduce the damage you take by about 20% from literally everything in the game. So that's a pretty decent bonus there. If you get 100 of something like, say, durability and your opponent has 0 pierce, or you've got 100 armor, you have the damage that you take, is how that works. There is a mathematical equation. I don't really want to break it out. So armor strength of 40 is actually pretty good. It makes it so that the armor points that you've got there are dramatically extended above and beyond what you would expect from that amount. And it makes it so that this ship is way more durable than it appears on paper. Now, you are going to notice as well that this thing is missing shields, which is something that you can sort of remedy, but the lack of shields really does hammer home that you're not supposed to be sort of keeping these guys in a fight and having them recover their hit points throughout the fight. You're supposed to sort of just grind out, hope that your guy survives. You can pull them out of the fight completely, but generally speaking, it's just you lose hit points until you die is how these guys generally work here. 1,000 maximum speed, this is pretty good. It's the second fastest out of the frigates there, and it is fast enough that it is capable of catching and running down ships that it is trying to target. With a gun that's at 200 Pierce, as compared to before, there's a whole bunch of heavier frigates, like, say, the Garda Flak frigate, or some of the other factions' heavier frigates there, like the Tempest, that were capable of resisting a good chunk of the damage that a light frigate was capable of throwing at it. Now, the Cobalt Light Frigate is capable of dealing full damage against a large number of frigates, and a lot of the support light cruisers as well have 200 durability. That means that these guys are capable of assassinating a very wide variety of targets, because light frigates are very cost efficient for the damage that they're capable of dealing, so long as they're capable of dealing that damage. If they're getting blocked, then of course their damage per second falls down a cliff, and their efficiency drops off a cliff as well. So being able to deal that full damage against that kind of ship there makes a pretty big difference in expanding out their role and making them better at their role in a few other situations there. There are some rare instances as well where you'd throw them against, like, say, a Javelus, which does resist quite a lot of their damage. It does improve their damage against those types of targets by a little bit as well, but not by a ton. You're still going to want to stick these against targets that they're much more potent against and much more cost efficient against. So taking a look at the things that these guys have for upgrades here. Over here we've got our general tree. There's nothing specific that these guys are capable of getting that really applies to specifically these guys. Garrison does kind of apply to them a little bit, but Home Guard does also apply to them if you get the Home Guard outpost, but that's kind of similar to what everyone gets. They're sort of like at-home bonuses. Not necessarily the most useful. There's no unique tech for these guys, so they can't unlock any abilities or anything like that. Going down, what we've got here is our military grade rounds for a 5% weapon increase, which is pretty poor for a first tier upgrade. We get 15%, which is much more standard. You get an increase of 10%, and then you get an increase of 10% to 25%. And then at the very end here, you're probably not going to actually get this, but Refined Propellants gives us plus 35%. And we are going to note as well, we don't gain any bonuses to our attack damage from our military tree default, and we only get 3 upgrades that affect our frigates here. So Military Tech 1, we unlock 5% max armor points. At Military Tech 2, we get Crippled Hull plus 10%, which does not impact our frigates because they don't get any bonus from having Crippled Hull. They don't have a Crippled Hull statistic. Same with max armor points at 3 and 5, and then the Crippled Hull at 10%. Unlike the Advent and Visari, there's no bonus damage up there, which means that you're stuck sort of just getting damage from Refined Propellants. And realistically speaking, most of the time when you're thinking about getting the ship, you're at most going to be talking about advanced ballistics. Anything past that, and you're really not likely to be relying that much on the Cobalt Light Frigate anymore. If we go further down here, this is where we get kind of the more interesting upgrades. Got access to advanced metallurgy, which gives us plus 10 armor strength. With the amount of armor that those guys have, stacking that on top of the existing armor brings us up to 50. That's actually a pretty okay bonus. It's not a huge amount. It's not going to dramatically increase these guys' toughness, but it is noticeable. Titanoferric plating brings us up to 25, up from 10 for the Cobalt. That means they've got 65 armor, and then they've got the ability to get up to 90 armor with the Repel on Premium armor, which is very, very good. Almost having all the damage that they take with their armor. The Titanoferric plating is where you're realistically going to get to, though. 65%, I believe, ends up being approximately a third of the damage that you take gets sort of shrugged off on your armor, which is a very, very good bonus. Being able to ignore about a third of the damage that you take approximately is a great way to keep the ship's armor alive a lot longer. Over here you got hull reinforcement, plus 12% max hull points, and hull regeneration increased by 5%. Crippled hull, again, doesn't matter here. That's only for capital ships. This is an okay bonus. You're only really looking at the plus 12% max hull points if you're really focusing on your frigates, though. And the reason for that is you don't regenerate hull at all during combat for the tech faction. Only the Visari do that. Being able to get that hull reinforcement is really just for those max hull points, because frigates tend to just fire until they get killed. And being able to sort of have more upfront hit points does make it so that they're capable of doing that. You've got the fortified superstructure, which gives you an additional 13% of your maximum hull points. You do recover out of battle faster when you've got better hull regeneration, so you do get another 5% tacked on with fortified superstructure. The one that's really not worth it for this type of ship is the expert damage control. This is really only for capital ships. Maximum hull points only increases by 5% for a tier 4 tech is really, really bad. The plus 20% hull regeneration, again, doesn't matter for this class of ship, and the crippled hull is completely ignored for this class of ship. So again, we're looking at a bonus that we're largely not getting all the features of here, but fortified superstructure is where you're going to stop if you're looking for cost-effective upgrades for your frigate fleet. Getting to fortified or expert damage control is a great tech still, because you're going to want to transition to having more capital ships, but it's really not a help for your early game stuff there. Lastly, we've got shield upgrades. Corvette shield refit is necessary to get the frigate shield refit. Don't be confused by the way that this is set up here. The Frigate Shield refit gives you 400 hit points on the Cobalt Light Frigate, and the Frigate Shield refit scales nicely because as you're switching over to other types of ships, like the Guard of Flak Frigate, or you need to get access to the Calebs, you also get the bonuses for those, and it's also required for the Cruiser Shield refit. 400 extra shield points for a tier 2 tech is fantastic. That's a huge amount given the type of ship there. It represents a very big boost to their total percentage of hit points that they have, and it makes it really tanky for the class of ship that it is, making it so that these guys are capable of absorbing a very, very good amount of damage. I think that this is a fantastic technology for these guys. You do, of course, also have the ability to get the improved shield raise for plus 15%, and the plus 40% with the superior shield emitters. These are very good techs, but they come in on very late, and you're probably not going to get the most use out of them, no matter really what type of ship you're using. The only thing that really benefits from this tremendously, I'd kind of argue, is the probably the Hoshiko robotics cruisers, which are going to use very late game, and the Harka heavy cruisers, which are going to use a lot of late game. Maybe the Algrovs, but they shouldn't be getting attacked. Generally speaking, if you've got these plus percentage bonuses, you've kind of moved past the point where you're going to be using a lot of the Cobalt Light Frigates under normal circumstances. Although now that they're capable of going for that 200 pierce, they are useful into the later parts of the game there. Now, the basic military tech tree isn't the only place where you're going to look if you're playing as the tech faction.
Build more military research stations.
Wrong button there. Over here, we can see that we've got access to some new things here. So this should give you a general clue as to the way that the tech faction should be working. You've got access to counter deployment. As long as there's an enemy ship present in your system, you get minus 50% ship build time, which means you build them much faster, which means you can sort of scramble a deployment and have a bunch of like new ships there that are capable of joining in on the fight. This is only for the tech enclave. The other faction instead gets an additional 10% damage that they can research at tier 5 for their damage on their autocannons, which I forgot to mention. But basically, you're capable of slamming out a lot of ships much faster if your enemy's in your orbit there. You also have access to labor negotiations, which is active sort of all the time, minus 10% to the ship build time, so they build a bit faster, and then up to the industrial juggernaut, which is minus 50% of the build times. And then you've also got access to the industrial complex, which reduces your factory unit build time by an additional 25%, and it reduces your unit price by minus 5%. If you combine certain conditions, you can build ships incredibly quickly. I have not actually checked exactly how the math works out, but these guys can slam out ships very, very, very fast and have a slight discount on it. The assumption for this faction is that you're going to have access to more money than other factions, which makes it so that they're capable of using that faster build speed to their advantage to get like a frontline shipyard to produce a whole ton of ships that are capable of contesting your opponent there. And the reason that you might actually want to have frontline ships as this faction is because of Home Guard and the garrison mechanic. If you've got access to the garrisons there, you're getting free units as long as you've got a shipyard. So you can have your garrisons produce your free units until you're at full capacity. You could have the garrison structure get you that 500 extra population worth of ships in that sector. And once you've sort of done that, you can then wait till your opponent attacks there, or they've killed a bunch of those ships. You can then start slamming out a whole ton of your own ships before they've engaged properly. You end up with a whole bunch more ships really, really quickly there. And as they kill off your Home Guard units, then you get more units faster because it'll replace those guys also faster for free. It's free units. So being able to just crank out a ton of Cobalt Light Frigates is kind of how this faction works. They're durable enough that they're not actually going to go down that quickly. They're supposed to be able to sort of move quite quickly to get to their target, but they're also tough enough that as they're getting there, they're not going to be taking too many casualties from enemy fire. And once they get there, they're not the most cost-effective damage of this class of ship there, but they are still capable of dealing relatively decent damage overall. Lastly, we've got the culture bonuses there. And what you get for these guys is maximum speed up to 15%. Plus 5% is probably what you're looking at. This does actually help the frigates a little bit more than some of your other classes of ships, not only because 5% of a larger number is a larger bonus, but it does make it so that you're capable of getting into your opponent's backline a little bit faster, which is kind of what these guys are all about there. So I do think that this ship is pretty much exactly what it needs to be to do its role. It leans a little bit more heavily into being survivable, which is not really what its role is about there, but it does let it survive long enough to do what it's trying to do a little bit better. I think that it does okay. I think it's good enough at it what it does. It is fairly resource or upgrade starved because it really, really, really wants to get access to, at the very least, the frigate shield refit. That helps this ship tremendously in terms of its survivability for relatively cheap. It's hard to upgrade its weapons because of the specific path that you've got there, but it is still capable of taking up a decent amount of damage while dealing okay damage to your opponent there. I do think that, I do think that this thing is pretty okay. I think that you shouldn't underestimate it in spite of the fact that it's kind of that ship that you just sort of bully in the early game. And that's because it really doesn't do that well into capital ships there. It's not really meant to, it's not really designed to. So I wouldn't worry too much about its ineffectiveness in that sort of situation there. So in any event there, oh, we forgot to mention one little thing there, its cost. So taking a look at the cost of this unit, it does cost 5 supplies, so it is a little bit pricey supply-wise compared to the Disciple, but it is much cheaper than the Skirmisher. It costs 300 credits and it costs 55 metal, which again is the middle of the road for those prices. It is a tiny bit more expensive than the Disciple. It is a lot less expensive than a Vasari frigate. So kind of middle of the road as far as that kind of thing goes. Anyway, that is the Cobalt Light Frigate. You're probably going to have plenty of games where it is worthwhile getting a whole ton of them all at once, and that is something that this faction is pretty capable of doing if it needs to. But it does, of course, get outscaled pretty badly by other units that you're going to have access to as the tech faction in the later game. In particular, it does compete with the Harka Heavy Cruiser, which does basically a similar role, but does it quite a bit better, while also being substantially tankier. You are also considering taking the Shriken. I think that there's some bugs with that make it not work at its optimal capacity. You're also competing with the Silit Missile Corvette, which is actually capable of doing a lot of what the Cobalt is doing, but doesn't do it very cost effectively. It's something that competes in a few realms with a lot of other ships, but there aren't very many other ships that can do what it does at its level of cost effectiveness in its sort of niche there. So in any event, though, that is our video on the Cobalt Light Frigate. Hope you found this one enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.